This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole, and this week, in the wake of COP26, we bring you an exclusive interview with Jean-Eric Paquet. He's the Director General of Research and Innovation at the European Commission. The very future of our planet has never been so much in the spotlight. In the wake of the COP26 climate change gathering and between the virtual and in-person events for COP15 in Kunming to discuss biodiversity, world leaders are under pressure to set ever more ambitious green targets, and crucially to explain just how they'll meet them. To do so will require brand new approaches from governments, individuals, national and international organizations. Joining me from Brussels is Jean-Eric Paquet, Director General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. Jean-Eric, as I just said, you are the European Commission's Director General for Research and Innovation. What exactly, or perhaps more importantly, where exactly is your focus in terms of innovation to try and help protect the planet?
I think we are trying indeed to protect the planet. I think it's in fact about protecting our societies. I think that's what this is all about. And indeed, research and innovation in Europe is very much about producing knowledge, also solutions to deal with the climate change challenge, to deal with biodiversity loss. If you want to provide a platform to accelerate the transformation of our societies, so as to limit global warming, to stop the loss of biodiversity, to reduce impacts of pollution on the environment. This requires, in many cases, rather systemic approaches. It cuts across very many areas of human activity, energy, transport, agriculture. And when you work across these areas to transform the way our economies and societies work, you quickly come to see that there are crossovers, sometimes trade-offs, and science provides you with knowledge to really look at it as a system and try to address it with systemic solutions. And so our research and innovation is a lot about technologies. Well, obviously, technologies have a key role to play to help these urgent transformations. But we will also certainly have a lot of need to engage with society and help society to transform. And here again, research and innovation provide space for social innovation.
How do you cooperate with so many different departments to drive home your message about sustainability and biodiversity?
Well, within the European Commission, the European government, if I can put this analogy, research and innovation in reality is owned across the system. We have put up an approach where research priorities are discussed across the entire institution. So my colleagues in trade, in agriculture, in finances, in transport, in energy, of course, my colleagues leading on Europe's response on climate and on biodiversity loss, they are defining the research priorities in a joined-up manner. We co-create our research policy and our research priorities. I mean, my teams, of course, then coordinate it and ensure that this is then implemented and that the funding which we make available is used effectively and impactfully. But in the Commission, policy making is based on science evidence, and the science priorities are in turn fully informed by the policy needs, and the development of policies will therefore fully use science. It's quite it's not entirely unique, but we brought it really to an extremely ambitious level so that this co-creation integration generates better responses.
Nothing wrong with being ambitious. The difficulty often is reaching and achieving that ambition. But you talked about defining the research priorities. Can you give me a bit more detail on what that means?
Well, we have across Europe's research programs many different components. We are, for example, investing very significantly into fundamental science. And this is, of course, much more bottom-up and curiosity-driven with the European Research Council, which I sometimes call Europe's Nobel Prize factory. And in fact, recent Nobel Prize winners in chemistry and physics are today grantees of that European Research Council.
That's incredible.
We're really proud of that. We also have the European Innovation Council, which is helping to scale up our innovators. And you will not be surprised to hear that in Europe, many of the startups which are aiming to scale up, in fact, are linked to science and to deep tech, but also to provide innovative, disruptive solutions dealing precisely with climate change, mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, environment. And we have more and more of solutions coming in renewable energies, in clean aviation, but also in plant gene editing, for example, which stem from these startups, which we help them to grow. So these are two important components. At the heart of the program, we have what we call applied research or collaborative research. And in that major part of the program, it's about half of the 95 billion euros available under Horizon Europe for the next 7 years. Essentially, half of that funding is about dealing with these cross-cutting challenges. So we have research which deals with mobility, energy, and climate in a combined manner to find these solutions. We have also set up a number of partnerships, particularly important partnerships with industry, in steel, in aviation, in the construction sector, where we are working with industry to refine, pilot, demonstrate the technologies needed for our heavy industries to move towards a low carbon and zero carbon production pathway. And this will produce results in the medium and longer term. But what is particularly important for that research program is that it is set up to invent and find the technologies of tomorrow, but it is also geared at ensuring that the existing technologies can be scaled up and deployed in a fast manner, so that by 2030, which is this intermediate goal set by the European Union Green Deal, we effectively reduce already by 55% our CO2 emissions. So here, again, a research effort which is very, very closely connected to the policy ambitions of the Europeans, reducing our emissions, and of course working also on biodiversity loss. The European Green Deal, if you want, is very effectively supported by that research and innovation effort.
It's interesting because I wanted to ask about implementation. I mean, you are a fountainhead of ideas and research and development and technologies. Is that where it ends for you, or do you have any say in the implementation of these ideas and technologies?
I mean, obviously, transferring research results into society and into the economy is a particularly large area of activity, and you need to ensure that across ecosystems in Europe, there is knowledge of the research results so that they can be picked up by actors, by markets, by cities, by regional authorities. So there's a generic effort which is happening there. But we are also indeed trying to be a little bit more hands-on. And in the European Commission, we have, of course, many instruments around the European Green Deal to make this progress become very tangible by 2030. And so we are, and the Department in Research and Innovation, again, as I explained, we are connected and dealing with research across the entire institution. We therefore also have access to a number of additional instruments, be it regulation, other investment sources, for example, investing in transport or energy infrastructure. We also have access to project pipelines, and we create project pipelines with financiers like the European Investment Bank. So we see as a European Commission our responsibility not just in generating and inventing and helping Europeans to invent new technologies, but also as said to pilot them, demonstrate them, and then have a continuum in investing into their large-scale deployment. It's this continuum from science to the markets, which is not easy to achieve, very challenging in many instances, but where we can really make a difference and accelerate the needed transformations.
Is there an economic side to this, Jean-Eric? I mean, sometimes it costs companies and countries and organizations to go greener. Is that part of your thinking? And how do you persuade people of the cost element?
It's absolutely, of course, part of the equation. This transformation needs to be done across the economy and across society. There is a cost, or rather there is a needed investment. And research and innovation solutions, I think, can certainly very much help actors, be it public actors, private actors, to find the right design of deployment to ensure that this investment is indeed economically practical over time. And we have a number of solutions, be it on nature-based solutions, which I think we'll come back to, at least I hope, or in technologies where there are mechanisms to ensure that solutions which are technologically proven, which would make sense from their impact, which are sound solutions, can become marketable. So we have a number of instruments, guaranteed loans at an earlier stage when the product is being tested and confirmed, and then financing on a broader scale, including incentives for our banks, insurance companies to invest into these technologies, including through a taxonomy to make green investments much more visible, so that indeed these solutions can be deployed. But I would argue that, as I said, this is, of course, can be labeled costs. I think we need to label it investments. But what I think is maybe even more important to really see is that many of these investments are not necessarily additional investments to the ones made today by actors.
So very persuasive arguments for the accountants that they must change. Let's narrow it down a bit, Jean-Eric, to nature-based solutions. You have said nature-based solutions may be a relatively new term, and it is a new term for many. Can you explain what you mean by it?
It's a new term, there's no doubt about this. In reality, it's really very common sense. It's very practical and well-known solutions which have existed over time, but which our societies, maybe in the last century or certainly in the last decades, have more and more forgotten about and use less and less. It's about, if you want, using nature to provide solutions on climate change, reducing CO2 emissions, at the same time solutions which allow also to adapt a city or a territory to increasing climate change events, and nature-based solutions which obviously have then a major impact on biodiversity loss. Let me give you one example. It's for example, investing in recreating or regenerating an urban park in a city. I mean, this has many dimensions.
And I see you've got something like, sorry to interrupt you, you've got 25 urban areas across Europe and 70 cities, these nature-based solutions.
Yeah, where we are
that's early progress.
Testing it. Well, this is happening and tested at scale. So again, I think humans everywhere in the planet know how to create a park. This is something super traditional, but they have invested less and less into those. And if you do it properly, of course, you plant trees and local species which capture CO2, are great for biodiversity. It's a great place for leisure and for the well-being and health of ourselves, of our populations. And it can also serve in terms of adaptation, because in case of floods in particular, if properly designed, at moment of floods, these parks can also capture the excess water and very much limit the damages caused by the floods. So that's one example of a nature-based solution, which is traditional, has not been done enough. And what we are doing now with research is to firstly make the case that this has major benefits, make the case also that it can be, in terms of economics, quite easily invested into. And then lastly, of course, promote with local communities the use of these nature-based solutions so that they can be implemented more and more. They will have no doubt an impact. They are not a magic wand, but they have the beauty. They have the beauty of being practical. People can really own them. They can implement them also very much at local level. They don't need
and they can see the results in front of their very eyes.
Exactly, they can see the results, and they have this systemic nature: climate adaptation, climate mitigation, biodiversity in one go. So it's quite beautiful as an approach. So we are very much pushing on that.
Jean-Eric Paquet, let's pause there just for a moment. But we'll talk more after this short break, when I'll be asking how Europe can avoid a repeat of the devastating fires and floods that swept the continent this summer. Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for the Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the agenda. More now with Jean-Eric Paquet, Director General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. Jean-Eric, COP26 in Glasgow and COP15 in Kunming were both delayed by a year. How much has that delayed the fight to save the planet? And it must have been a setback on several fronts.
I think this COVID moment has also been for many a wake-up call on the need to deal with climate change and biodiversity loss. And so we need to capitalize on that. But I don't think it has really slowed matters down that significantly. And on the contrary, it has never been clearer on the urgency to deal with the matter. And I think COVID has created a sense of unity in many societies, which is now also transforming itself in political energy for acting fast and impactfully on climate change and biodiversity loss. The European Green Deal, which emerged before COVID, is in Europe this attempt, which is, I think, carried across Europe and increasingly also seen as the driver of our development to capitalize on that political momentum and ensure that we act not just in longer term frameworks. So 2050 is, of course, a particularly critical moment. And I must say, I would like here to underline that there are more and more countries, more and more societies which have now set 2050 as their target to be CO2 neutral. And I must say, I think we can be proud as Europeans to have led the way on that. And that's good. But I think what is maybe even more important, and that momentum I see starting to emerge beyond Europe, it's happening very much in Europe around research and innovation and many other activities, as we have discussed so far, but to also set 2030 as a key moment, intermediate phase, where concrete, tangible progress needs to have happened. 2050 is key, but for 2050 to be credible, we need to progress very significantly until 2030. And so that is really the conversation. Europe decided to upgrade its ambition. We will reduce our CO2 emissions by 55%, not 40% as was initially planned before COVID, but 55%. And I very much hope that many other partners across the globe will want to be as ambitious as the Europeans. So COVID, yes, is certainly an important and challenging moment, and the pandemic has had
but
massive,
no more, you think, than just a glitch?
I don't think it's slowing down the mobilization around these key challenges.
Earlier this year, the UN Environment Programme estimated the world needed to invest just over $8 trillion in nature by 2050 to tackle the triple crisis of climate, biodiversity, and land degradation. How likely do you think that is to be achieved?
I mean, these are staggering figures. I think they defy a little bit the human capacity to imagine what it is and how you can deliver that. So I think what you probably want to do is to break them down a little bit also. I mean, obviously, even on a yearly basis, these are massive investments of 500 billion plus euros or dollars. But I think what is maybe important to here underline is that these investments are not just about biodiversity. They are about mitigating climate change, so reducing CO2 emissions. They are about investing in our adaptation, and they are about preserving or reducing biodiversity loss. And as I said, there are a number of solutions, nature-based solutions, I mean, very visibly, but others as well, which cut across these three challenges. The European Commission has announced 27 billion before Glasgow, and our president, Frau von der Leyen, announced 5 billion more. So the Europeans are living up to that pledge, and we'll know in a few days' time whether collectively, globally, we will be. But I come back to what I said earlier on, Stephen. Of course, it's a staggering amount. But again, these are investments, I mean, firstly into our future, but also investments which are sometimes substituting irrelevant past-based investments. So if you look at the overall figure, and if you were to be able to deduce investments taking place today counterproductively into fossil fuels, then the equation already starts to be different. In addition to that, I think what you also need to see, and which we need to harness, I think, in terms of financial flows, is that the damages caused by climate change and biodiversity loss are even greater than these needs for investment. So finding ways, and again, a green taxonomy for markets, for capital markets, I think is an important contribution. We need to find the means for economic actors, also public players, to see that these investments are not costs, and on the contrary, they are well spent money to avoid even much greater, entirely negative costs linked to the damages which we are seeing increasing every year.
Well, we've been talking, Jean-Eric, 2030, 2050, but thinking about this summer, there were devastating floods in Europe, as you know, and forest fires across the Mediterranean, devastating floods in China too. How can the EU become more resilient to the effects of climate change?
No, we absolutely need to invest across the board in a number of solutions to be more adapted, because climate change is of course happening. But then adaptation needs to be invested in as well. And here again, in research and innovation, we've been working across Europe over the last years to learn the lessons of these extreme events. We had forest fires in the last 5 years of a magnitude which we had not seen before, so that we can be better prepared, better early warning systems. And here technology and research is certainly helpful. But again, coming back to nature-based solutions, we also need to invest into understanding what magnifies these extreme weather events which will take place. And sometimes the way forests are managed, monoculture, just one species, one type of trees, can be a factor to deeply accelerate the intensity of a forest fire. Looking at the way our rivers are managed, riverbanks, when properly managed with nature-based solutions, can absorb much more of overflowing water than if they are built and if you have too much concrete constraining the natural flow of the river. So we really need to continue to invest in understanding, and it's happening as I speak, and then investing in changing the way we are set up as a society, so that these extreme weather events, which will continue, can have a much more can be better forecasted, better acted on when they take place, but then also that their impact can be limited by these nature-based investments.
Can I ask you to talk to us briefly about the European Biodiversity Partnership that I think started in October? And also, you've talked about creating what you call missions to help with adapting to climate change. What are those two initiatives?
No, I'm saying I'm very proud of this European Biodiversity Partnership. It's not entirely new, but if you want, we operate under 7-year research programs. And as we shift into a new cycle, which is the case this year with Horizon Europe, we also need to renew our partnership. So we are renewing the Biodiversity Partnership, which brings together national research funders, but also research organizations and in fact, the most up-to-date science around biodiversity, and where we will continue to explore the very many needed solutions into halting biodiversity loss, but also in increasing our knowledge on the drivers of that biodiversity loss, so that we can better calibrate our replies. I am really very hopeful that this partnership will continue to have very, very strong impact in aligning this European research effort and producing these outcomes. The missions are slightly different, and I'm grateful that you mentioned them and that you are aware of them. They were launched by the European Commission only a few weeks ago, the European mission on cancer, on soils, on oceans, on climate adaptation, and on cities. These missions aim at being platforms to do what we've been discussing now in the last minutes, about creating platforms to connect research knowledge and solutions to practical implementation, to do that in a manner which also then connects the various layers of governance, so the European layer, the national one, the local one, to then work with all interested actors, so of course primarily at the outset with scientists, but then as you deliver and try to achieve concrete objectives also with citizens, cities, local authorities. And for each of the mission, we have set a very concrete objective by 2030. And for example, 100 climate neutral cities in Europe by 2030. A super ambitious objective, but I can see more and more European cities which want to be part of that mission, use that platform to accelerate their transformation towards climate neutrality. If you want, this is inspired by the Man on the Moon mission, which I would like to call the Woman on Mars mission, where you set this very concrete objective, and then you roll out the entire toolbox of knowledge, solutions, investments, regulation at all levels with those which need these solutions in their daily life, citizens and at local level. That's what the missions are about. They were just kicked off. And in these areas, they will, of course, be major contributors to accelerating the green transformation of Europe, making the Green Deal a tangible reality as we progress towards 2030.
And every country should have this in their own toolbox, individual toolboxes, I suspect. Do you think the world is in a better place following virtual COP15 and COP26?
Well, I mean, the COP15 just started, and it started, of course, with momentum, which is really positive. The real work will take place now in April next year. I think what is clear is that leaders and around leaders, society is clearer than ever on the reality of these challenges, on the fact also that these challenges are man-made problems. Climate change and biodiversity loss are man-made. The science is absolutely crystal clear on that, and I think this is now understood and recognized, and increasingly it will be acted upon. And I see that as I said, for 2050, there is a lot of a strong emerging consensus that by that time we need to be a completely different society. So that's very positive. There's no doubt about that. I think where the challenge really is to transform that broad consensus into tangible realities today, tomorrow, next week, next month, so that by 2030 we already are fully engaged and have progressed in mitigating CO2 emissions, in being resilient, more resilient to this climate change which is happening, and start to halt biodiversity loss.
Jean-Eric Paquet, many thanks to you for joining us here on The Agenda.
Stephen, thanks a lot.
Don't forget you can watch everything from past Agenda episodes and find additional exclusive content on our website, cgtn.com/Europe, or on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @CGTN Europe. Coming up on a future Agenda, why empowering women could be the key to solving the global poverty crisis. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.